Okay, I think we're recording now. I haven't used Zoom before. I've used a number of other live streaming software, but figured maybe Zoom's a little easier to record these videos. We'll be taking a look at Google Play's in-app review API. This came out maybe 10 days ago, and I'm really interested in it. This is something I've been looking at for quite a while before they actually officially released it. But yeah, I wanted to take a look at the official implementation. I try not to peek too much and get too far ahead. So a lot of this will be initial reaction, seeing how other people are using it, reacting to it, how we're going to implement it into a sample application. But yeah, I'll start giving my thoughts on this, and hopefully at the end of this, I can kind of collect them. I think this will be two parts. The first part will be going through and actually implementing the initial API and seeing how far we can get there. The second part will be probably actually testing it out. I believe there's a delay between the first part and the second part, but we'll get more into that. So this is the Google Play in-app review API. It came out, I believe, like August 5th. And this is pretty much what it does. So if you're building or managing an Android app, this might look pretty familiar if you've been using iOS for a while. So on iOS, or if you're using an iPhone app, if you're using an application, you'll usually see these types of prompts, right? So this says, how do you like this application? On a scale of 1 to 5 stars, you can submit some information here. You can also give some text review here as well. So not only can you go from 1 to 5 stars, but you can also give a couple sentences in terms of feedback, as you see here, and then you submit. And this actually shows up on the Google Play Store. Why this is cool is that historically for the Android community, you'd have to redirect out of your application into Google Play to leave a rating and review. This means that fewer users actually left ratings, fewer users actually left reviews. And so this is an incentive from Google to really drive more ratings and reviews, similar to what Apple does. So we will look at this guy right here. And there's some device requirements. So this is running API level 21 and above. Most of the apps and folks that I work with have this running already at this level. This is an Android OS that was released a number of years ago, maybe 5, 6 at this point. So yeah, you're probably in the clear for that. And they need to have the Google Play Store installed. So most of the applications that I deal with do deal with the Google Play Store. But if you do deploy in an area, for example, in China, you might not have Google Play. You need to ensure that your code for this in-app rating system doesn't, prompt over there, right? Because the user will just have a bad experience and it won't work. And there's also a requirement here for the Play Core library. This is version 1.8.0. It says this was released in July of this year. So most devices should already have this, but that's just something else to keep in mind. I have the emulator loaded up, so we'll see if that actually works there. But yeah, otherwise we can actually load it up on a phone, maybe in the second part of in the second part. And they have some interesting requirements. I try not to jump too far ahead and try to have a kind of a first take. But for some of this information, so they say to trigger it at a certain point. So they're going to let you decide when to trigger this in-app rating, and they say to do it at a point that makes sense for a user, right? So if you have the classic scenario example is if you have a game, the user beat 5 levels, right? Maybe they're at a point where they understand the game pretty well, they're pretty happy, and it's not just when they open up the app on their first experience, or maybe you even want to wait a couple days before asking the user to leave feedback. The other thing is they mentioned, do not prompt the user excessively for reviews. And they mentioned this section on quotas. And so this is really interesting. They say calling this launch review flow dialog or method might not display the in-app rating dialog. And they also mention explicitly you should not have a call to action button. And so this is very similar to what you see in some of the iOS documentation too. So that means typically, you might, in your current application, you might have a button that says, hey, leave a review. And for that button for leaving a review, you should leave that as is. You shouldn't change that. If you have that leave a review button, if the user presses that, you should direct them to the Play Store. That's what this documentation is saying, because this in-app dialog, might not display for them, and because there's a quota there. So Apple actually has, I think, 3 per year, or per the last 365 days. That's the maximum number of times you can launch it. Google didn't mention that number. I assume they want to adjust it, so they don't want to limit themselves to having a hard limit. We'll play around with it. We'll see, what limit we experience on a couple different devices, but yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, if you have anywhere that that says, hey, do you want to rate this app, or press this button to rate the app, don't use the in-app rating flow, essentially is what they're saying. And that makes sense, right? Like, you kind of want this to happen kind of in the moment at the right time. This is something that's to be very, very quick. The user doesn't really have to think about it. They just want to be able to press those stars and then rate it as quick as possible. Okay, so we looked over some of the items over here, and yeah, so they mentioned more like, don't ask the user any questions before you show this, right? If you're going to do that, maybe lead into the Play Store. There are some actually, Apple's pretty explicit not to do that, but for Google, I think that's probably a little bit more best practice if you're going to prompt the user, get them out of the app. For design guidelines, it's like, don't mess with these cards. Do not use overlays. They don't want you really fiddling with this, right? They want this to be an unadulterated review experience. That makes perfect sense, right? Like, they don't want you adding extra, text around this thing, like, hey, give us 5 stars, while you're looking at this, right? So I think that makes sense. Let's jump into the code. So I'm going to integrate this with Kotlin. And as part of the PlayCore SDK, to set up your development environment, follow setup instructions for the PlayCore library guide. I'm going to use an application that I used for rating and review libraries. It's actually on Google Play. I think I have it here. It's called the Rating Library Tester. I'm going to use this since it's actually published on Google Play. I don't think I've made an update since earlier this year, but that will be important because we actually want to test out and see what does an actual rating look like, and can we deploy this app with the rating itself. So we'll load that up. I'm loading that up in the emulator. Hopefully it doesn't cause too much system performance issues. But let's go look at the setup instructions in Kotlin. I think we have to add a dependency over here. If you're developing your project using Java or Kotlin, you can import the PlayCore library into your Android project as a Gradle dependency. So I don't think we have this currently. So this would be in the apps build.gradle module. And this would be PlayCore, right? Just to take sure. Don't see that there. Cool. And which one should we use? So this is downloaded from Google Maven's dependency. For Kotlin users, you can also import the extensions. Okay. So we'll add both of those in. I don't have any crazy dependency management system. So this is pretty standard. Use Google Play for, I guess this is for in-app ratings. Just making sure we don't have any conflicts. And I think some of these other dependencies are a little older, but I don't think that should really matter. We could definitely update them if need be. So we'll sync this project. I think that's all we need to do. Yeah, to be able to use the PlayCore library. So we'll get that running, we'll build that and see if that works. So they have this thing called a review manager. And they say the review manager is the interface that lets your app start an in-app review flow. Obtain it by creating an instance using the review manager factory. And then for this, it says request a review info object. And so they say when to request in-app reviews. I think we touched upon that a little bit. But just to clarify that, it's, trigger when, this flow is powerful enough. We'll go back to the application and kind of see where that makes sense. For now, we actually might add it just to a button, just to make sure it works. I know ideally they say long-term don't do that, but we kind of just want to test this out, right? And then we'll create this request task, and then they'll get the result. And then use the review info instance to launch the in-app review flow. Okay, so this is literally 3 little sections of code, and we should be able to do this. Let's see how easy this is. So we launched our rating library tester app, and you can see how this app works, right? We have this default screen that isn't in a scroll view, so it looks pretty terrible here on the Pixel 2. Probably want to fix that, but we could probably add just another little button down here just to test it out and just say like, hey, this is the launch, the review, or actually we could make this another screen, right? We could say when you navigate to this screen, launch the in-app review, and that actually might make more sense, right? Because we have these different libraries over here that allow us to launch the in-app rating. So we can just make it another option potentially. So if we launch this library, amplify, we go here, we see this. If we go to this one, launch this library, it pops up automatically. We can have the same process for this. I think this is, oh, let's see how far we got with Gradle Sync of a little older MacBook Pro. It's only 2017. I know I got to upgrade soon though. Let's see. So we have the main activity. We have our main fragment. And then we have our review fragment. I looked in this code in a little while, so I think I remember most of it, but let's just throw this over here. So we have all these different libraries. And instead of launching this library, we're going to do launch in-app rating. So I'll launch that in-app rating. I think I can make this font a little bit bigger. So I'll launch in-app rating, and like any good developer, we'll just start copy pasting code in. So we have this manager, this review manager factory. I believe for these other ones, I think the Android config actually had the context. So we should be able to do that. And application context. Hopefully application context works. Let's double check. Go into they just say details. Yeah, I think application context should work. Hopefully we don't need to tie it to UI level context. Then request review info object. When your app reaches one of these points, to instance to create a review task. Let's copy and paste some code. So this is the request. This is taking our manager, and it's requesting request review flow. So it says needs to be called before to obtain a review info object. Okay. Then we're taking this request and we're adding this add on complete listener with this feature result. And this says the listener will be called as a listener when the task completes. So this is just for this task, for the, I guess this request review info returns this task with this review info object. So this is just allowing us to access this asynchronously. And if the request is successful, great. And I think I show toasts over here, no? Maybe I don't show any toast. Well, let's show a toast. If something goes wrong. In-app rating failure. And then I believe we have a third parameter. Cool. So we'll show a little error if this failure doesn't work, or if this request doesn't work. And then if we get the review info object, I think we have to do something with it, right? And it says the review info object is only available for a limited amount of time. Your app should request a review info object ahead of time, but pre-cache, but only once you're certain that your app will launch the in-app review flow. That's kind of interesting. It makes me more curious what is actually in a review info object. We'll take a look at the developer information. So information about reviews. So it doesn't really have too much publicly available information. Let's see if the yeah, it just says review info. So there's some secret goodness in there. But this is interesting, right? So it says like, you know, you can request it ahead of time because it's asynchronous, right? I'm curious, how long does that actually take, right? Is this a second, couple seconds to get this review info object instant? And then you can show it. But so you can request it, but you have to essentially use it, right? You can't just kind of request this review info object and not use it. And lastly, launching the in-app review. Use the review info instance to launch the in-app review flow. Wait until the user has completed it before the app continues to its normal flow. So they have a little callback over here. So we'll take this flow. So we need the activity. To actually show the UI. That makes sense, right? We have to correlate it with the screen. We're taking this review info. And I think for Android config, I think we have the activity there. We can just use this. Yeah, and I mean, it shouldn't leak it, but I mean, we're hopefully on the same screen. But yeah, this can get a little nasty passing your activity into here. I'm not sure under the hood how it's handling the implementation of it, but you might want to be a little bit more careful. Anytime you pass your activity to a third-party library. So it says the API does not indicate whether you has reviewed or not, but they say like don't do anything else until this has happened. So we'll make a toast in app rating complete. You know, if we for example, if we request the rating dialog to be shown, but maybe we hit our quota, right? We still want to see this because this entire code flow will be hit. But yeah. Oh, I forgot to call show. Been there, done that before in terms of problems. Okay, so like it now? Great. All right, so that's all the code. It's pretty darn simple. I could see if you have a really complex navigation flow, or depending upon where you want to show it within that flow, like adding your next logic here could be kind of interesting. And also, like, obviously this is a really simple app, right? We're doing everything in a fragment, but if you have a pretty complex architecture, putting this in your navigation logic is pretty interesting. Like maybe long term, like I'm using what's it called, the fragment navigation over here, and like maybe we want to use that instead for handling this, and like just say like, hey, when you click this button, navigate here, right? Because doing this programmatically, it gives you more flexibility, but more can complicate things. So it'll be interesting to see, like after this initial version, what kind of developer conveniences will Google add to this in the future. Okay, so we're about 30 minutes in. We added the code. Let's quickly add some code to show the screen. So I believe over here for the libraries, we'll add another library called in-app rating. We'll call this Google in-app rating. We'll give it a URL for the project. Be that one. And the license, what license do we have? No license? Maybe that makes sense. Cool. And let's see where we use this. So I think we only use it in a couple places. So if it's the in-app rating launch in-app rating, I think we have this one other place on the other fragment. Oh, yeah. We need to pass these guys out too, right? So, yeah, I think this is just for the default library. Let's use the in-app rating one. I'm curious if I upload this application as is, will Google flag it? Like, I don't know. Maybe they say, hey, you can't do that. It's a tester app, like for ratings libraries, so kind of makes sense that this is front and center. But we'll see. Oh, do I need any other text? No, I think I'm okay. So let's deploy this and see what we get. This is pretty ugly. Kind of want to just wrap that in a scroll view really fast. I guess it's a constraint layout. I forget. I think you have to do something special for the constraint layout wrapped in the scroll view, but I have to confirm. I'll leave it like it is. We'll change it after the stream. Oh, expecting a top level declaration. Imports. Oh. This is a couple different projects. I think this is the tester. I have this project. It's completely 100% open source on GitHub, but I'll make sure to add this code once it's working. So we're building. Let's jump ahead a little bit. Some of the documentation. So after this, we're going to think about testing the flow. In-app reviews require your app to be published in Play Store. However, you can test your integration without publishing your app to production. So our app's already published in production. I think it should work. I think we should be able to leave a rating from a debug build. I don't know. They also have this, okay, they have this thing called the fake review manager, which I saw really briefly before. Allows you the fake behavior of the API. This should only be used for unit integration tests to verify the behavior of the app once the review is completed. And this makes sense, right? This is like just taking you out of the review to the next thing in your code. And fake review manager does not simulate the UI. It only fakes the API method by providing a fake review info object and returning the success status. And as a developer, maybe in your debug builds, like, you want that logic. Like, I guess it doesn't matter, right? Like, you can have the production logic, and if you exceeded the quota for your account, whatever, on the debug build, you'll just kind of go to, the next flow. I'm just thinking about, I guess, for a UI test, right? It's annoying if you don't know if the UI is going to show or if it is going to show. So that's why a fake review manager would be helpful. And they have all this troubleshooting stuff, which we'll probably run into some of it. But they say your app is not published yet on Google Play Store. So it has to be at least in the internal testing track. So our account needs to be able to review. I have an emulator. I don't think I set up. I just loaded up this emulator. I don't think I signed in. It's probably a fatal mistake. Okay, I might stop screen sharing to actually enter in my credentials. But yeah, we need that. And the user has already reviewed the app. Delete the review directly. We might need to do that. I think I might have already reviewed it. So I might need to log into the Google Play Store. Let's take a look. So what does it say? Delete. Let's look at deleting the review first. Quota has been reached. Oh, so if you use these two tracks, is it unlimited quotas on these two tracks? Using the following conditions must be met. The quota limits are not enforced in the apps downloaded from the internal test track. We actually might want to just do that, just to make sure. I don't know. When using an internal test track, the following conditions must be it. So this is kind of tricky wording, right? Does this mean we shouldn't try to exceed our quota so that we can do the internal test track? Yeah, I might separate that into kind of a second review. All right, so that was the code. Let's just see if it shows up. Actually not. All right, so that was pretty easy. I'll probably stop this stream and we can make another one, just actually going through and testing it. The developer experience was super fast. I did want to walk through some of these reviews. I took a look at some of them on Reddit. But yeah, I think it's kind of funny reading through them and seeing the developer experiences. But yeah, on Reddit, this was posted for the Google developers blog post, and like people are like, oh, why would they not show the feedback if the dialogue is shown or not? You know, what's the purpose of that? And I think we talked about why they don't want to do that. It's because of the quota, right? And like, if you can game that system in terms of like, oh, the dialogue wasn't shown, let me like try to show the review again. Like, I don't know. I assume you can have some pretty malicious activity. Somebody's like, so the review must come out of the blue and never be opened by a user action. Google, don't talk about broken user experiences. Definitely, not this happy users. And yeah, users are talking about like, hey, this is to prevent these bad tactics. And some users are talking about some of the stuff that we talked about. And yeah, and generally Android developers were, developed a lot of Android apps. They're sometimes pretty cynical when it comes to new APIs, and sometimes for good reason. But it's interesting seeing like some of the initial reactions. And yeah, so the people are talking about like, yeah, we don't necessarily rate it, or we wouldn't show it to users that already rated it. And then this user brings up a good point, right? Talking about Google having newer, weighting newer ratings better than older ones. So like maybe we do want a user to like rate the app multiple times, and in iOS land that happens, right? Like you can have those 3 prompts, and you can actually reset ratings. So it's actually really important, to get new ratings, especially if you reset them. And yeah, I think that's still, I don't know what will happen, right? If you've already rated it, I assume you'd see that rating again as long as the quota hasn't been reached. But it's a good question. Uh, and so yeah, more discussion about that, about launching mechanism and good point. This user, they mentioned like, hey, like, yeah, full screen blocking of the app, like it's still an interruptive, right? Even if it's like a little bottom sheet, like, yeah, I don't know. I think like a native, I don't know. It'd be hard to do a native implementation, right? Because then you'd have the developer do it themselves without having Google have control. Like this is probably the closest you're going to get for a an implementation that you don't control. Yeah, and some users are saying like, yeah, this is an interruptive, right? Like having that rate button is nice because maybe you put that in your settings, right? It's a place that the user can go. They're not necessarily this is interrupting their flow. So users are talking definitely flow, and from the UI is super important. Some people said they're having some trouble getting to work. They need to push this to a test track. They talked about the fake review manager. Yeah, I still think users are right? There's still some open questions here. So this was from the Android dev channel. I think there are a lot more comments actually in the actual Android channel. And this, I guess, this channel is geared towards maybe more public users or more general Android users, not necessarily just developers, but definitely people in this channel are pretty savvy and power users. This is a good one, right? From a user like, hey, it's going to be even easier to leave a 1 star for anybody that's nagging me to make a review. or nagging me to leave a review. Uh, oh yeah, so this says every 28 days or so. There's a mechanism. Uh, and I'm curious where they got that 28-day number. Maybe that's an internal code, internal implementation. So, oh, this developer says for messing with it before it was public. So I guess they opened it every day and tried rating. Don't know. Um, isn't reliable. Yeah, I could definitely see this. This is not very reliable at all. Um, and I could see you as a using an application being very like, hey, let's just fire this off in a bunch of different spots because we don't know if the user saw it, or there's no tracking mechanism, right, to say like, hey, have they seen a dialogue? Like, you're gonna have to implement your own tracking in terms of like, have I actually tried to fire this request for this user before? And so yeah, it's going to take even extra some maybe it's similar level management than that you already do. Um, like if you have a very simple rating request mechanism, like you just have it as a button, like in your, I don't know, in your hamburger menu, like you probably don't care how many times a user presses that. But yeah, for this, like, yeah, you're gonna have to track it. Like it adds complexity, right? If you're going to go out of your way to actually proactively ask for these reviews. Um, this is interesting. I was hoping I could have my button that goes out to the Google Play Store to put a review. Yeah. And so, I mean, the argument there is like, yeah, just use the previous mechanism, how you typically did it, which is, you fire off a URI intent to the Play Store, and you know, should should direct you outside of the app. But yeah, maybe Google could have exposed like a little easier way to like direct the user, um, to your application, maybe using the Playcore library similarly. One says like in-app prompt, another says like shoot me out of the app and then bring me back. Um, I think that's kind of interesting. Um, yeah, and, as a developer, yeah, you don't like that. You don't like the idea of not knowing, right? So the non-determinism of whether a prompt is shown or not, like, it's going to be a lot of fire and forget, and I assume people will just be overly aggressive on this, just saying like, hey, I'll just try to fire it as many places as I can with luck. Maybe maybe the user will see it a couple times, and I don't. It doesn't matter if you continue to fire because the user won't continue to see it. Um, why does this even exist? Okay, so some users are kind of confused in terms of the review inflation. Like, I mean, this doesn't work. But yeah, so it's interesting seeing, different perspectives, and obviously there's a lot of unknown. We'll actually get through, and I'll plan to just upload the application to the test track. I'll log in Google Play on that device. I'll delete the review for the next video, and we can walk through actually using it. But the code looked pretty simple. Documentation looks pretty simple. It's interesting seeing some of the initial developer reactions, and yeah, I look forward to kind of summarizing this at a later date. But it was fun to walk through it with a fresh set of eyes and actually record and seeing how did I react to it. Well, until part 2, take care. Oh, I should